What is up, everyone? Happy Saturday. Today is September 24th of 2022. It is the last September of the third quarter of the year. We just started the month of fall, so I don't know how your year has been so far, but my hope is that we finish what we started strong and have a good rest of 2022. So a quick introduction about myself as people start to trickle in and say good morning and say hi to us. My name is Param. I am your weekly host of this family education and support group that's related to addictions, mental health, codependency, trust, communication, self-care, and a little bit of everything in between. Good morning, Jim. Good morning, everyone that's about to come in. A few things about myself, just to kind of preface a little bit is, so my name is Param. I got a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. I am a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. I'm a high school basketball coach. Oh man, we got a lot of people saying hi. So let me actually say hi to all these people. Jess, happy you made it live. I know you've been faithfully watching over there on our YouTube channel. Cataline, good morning as always. Martha, always a pleasure. Beta, thank you for all your support. Hossein John, good morning as always. And Dorothy, what's up? From the Jersey Shore. Look at that. We got the whole U.S. covered right now from all different places. Monir John, good morning. And everyone else, you know, if people pop up, good morning in advance. I got to keep saying it. Eileen from Miami, what's up? Monir and Jose were from San Jose. So we got everyone. I mean, we are covering the map of this country pretty well right now. So it's an honor to be here. That's a really cool thing that I get to do and be a part of your community. And so for those of you who've been coming, you know, we provide a lot of support. It's highly interactive. When you write questions or add insights or feedbacks, I always respond to it in real time. And that's one of the beauties of this thing. It's always free of charge. I don't sell anything or promote anything. I just want to provide information to anybody that might need it. So as right before I get into today's talk, I just wanted to open it up with something that's not related to today's talk. So today we're going to be talking about all things codependency, because I believe that you cannot talk about addictions and recovery without seriously taking a look at codependency, because addictions oftentimes is preceded by codependency, and more often than not, addictions is enabled and continued through codependency. So it's in there before it even happens, it's in there during it, and it's in there after it. So if we don't talk about it, we're doing a disservice. But I do want to talk about something. I know you've been following me for multiple years now on this platform, and we've gone through a lot of polarizing times in this country, in this world. And one thing you've noticed from me, I never, ever, ever talk about personal beliefs, politics, all that kind of stuff, because I strongly believe that mental health and addictions doesn't discriminate if you're on the right, if you're on the left, if you're anywhere in between. And I don't care if you are the left or the right. I love you anyways. And my goal is to be able to provide support for you regardless of where you fall in it. So I'll continue with my commitment of not ever bringing in that kind of stuff into these conversations. But there's something else going on in the world, which I'm going to talk about it for 2 minutes real quick. And, you know, I'm born and raised in the country of Iran. So I spent and developed majority of my formative years in that country. And right now, Iran is in the news. If you turn on any news station, you'll be able to see it. And the roots of it all, it's not about religion. It's not about, it's not about any of that stuff. What's happening in that country, which is, like I said, the country of my origin, and some of the people that are watching it, is a basic fundamental principle of human rights. And it's something that's been happening for a long time. It's just this individual, her name is Mahsa, the 22-year-old female who lost her life through police custody, which has led to uproar of protests all over the world. It's just about human rights, and I'll tell you this: when you oppress and you suppress and you control human beings and take away their autonomy and take away their rights and take away their freedoms and tell them what they can and can't do, it never leads to anything good. I mean, this is something on a macro level, but even on a micro level, on a psychological level inside the home, if you try to control something or someone, it goes out of control. If you take away the people's rights to make choices and decisions for themselves, it's going to backfire. And I don't know if you've been following it or not, when they cut off things like the internet and don't allow people to be able to share and communicate what's going on in there. And God knows what happens without visibility. Nothing good happens in the dark. Just if you believe in that kind of stuff, send a little thought, send a little prayer to the people of that country. They're wonderful human beings. And hopefully they can persevere and pull through this. If any of the Iranian fans watching this, if you have loved ones and family members currently in Iran that are not able to experience the freedom we experience in this country, I hope they're safe and I hope they're okay. And I just wanted to start with that because I'd be a little tone deaf being from where I'm from and who I'm connected to and my roots to not address it. So just wanted to open up that. Thank you for listening to that. And let's get back to what this support group is for and what the intention of the support group is. So it's provide you support and education and information in a community through your healing and recovery journey. And today we're going to talk about codependency. So this one's wonderful and awesome, because if you're watching this as a family member or a spouse or just a human being, it's going to relate to you, and you're going to be able to see how your own codependent patterns not only continued and enabled addictions in your life and the lives of others, but hopefully wake you up to the fact that these things happen long before the addiction of your loved one. So let's just define codependency. So codependency is behaving in relationships with a persistent prioritization of someone else's needs. So you put someone else ahead of you. You put something else ahead of you. And oftentimes, almost all the times, at your own expense. So you sacrifice who you are for someone else. And that might sound cute and dandy and respectful to do and just kind of honorable to do at some point in life if it happens few and far between. But when it's a pervasive pattern that endures a lifetime and continues ad infinitum from the time you were a child, it becomes destructive. It becomes hurtful and harmful to self and others. And also you assess your mood based on the moods of others, and you assess your moods based on the behaviors of others. Like I've asked parents before, how you doing? As long as my kid's okay, I'm okay. I mean, what does that even mean? Like, what about you? How are you doing? Regardless of if your kid's doing okay or not. Or I ask someone, hey, how are you doing today? And it's like, well, as long as my spouse is clean and sober, then I'm okay. I can breathe. It's like, well, those two things shouldn't even be related to each other. But those are codependent patterns. And I'm going to tell you some of the roots of this stuff today to really help you out. So let's go through some of the signs of codependency. So the reason I share this with you is I want you to sit down as I go through these signs and kind of, you don't have to write it down, but maybe check which one of these things apply to you. Okay, which one of these apply to you? And then I'm going to get into the roots of codependency, like how it all starts, not just a generic Google search, but from like a clinician's perspective, and then talk about the recovery and the healing for it. So it's a robust session. I've never done this one before to this extent. So sit back, relax, and let's go through it. So one of the signs and symptoms of codependency is a deep-seated need for the approval of others. So do what you need to do, say what you need to say, act how you need to act, not because you want to, but because you want something or someone else to pat you on the back, approve of you, and give you love. Now, I know that sounds like, well, isn't that the way it is? Maybe. I mean, I know we all have ulterior motives when we do things, but when it comes to a pervasive pattern of always doing things for the approval of others, it's coming from a lack, a need that was never established in the first place. So if you feel like you have to do things for people to love you and you couldn't just be yourself to be loved, that creates a recipe for disaster. Okay? So that's kind of the first one. See if you have that, identify with that. The next one says self-worth that depends on what others think of you. So self-worth, by definition, is value that one gives to themselves, from themselves, through themselves. Like that's the whole point of self-worth. Now, if you can't recognize the value you have, and the only self-worth you get is by what other people tell you you are or validate for you, that creates a recipe for disaster. Because what if you don't show up one day? What if you don't do what you need to do one day? What if you aren't able to be present one day and no one's able to give you that worth that you're looking for? Then you're left with what? A hole, vacancy, emptiness. And that's what I always say. Sometimes we're human doings and sometimes we're human beings. We get accustomed to doing things to get validation and love and worth. But when we're just ourselves, do we feel like we have that same value? I don't know. It's a question for you to ask yourself. The next one that I have, this is, okay, so every parent here, you're going to identify with this times 1,000, okay? Not just parent, but those of you who know what you've done to get your loved one into recovery. It says a habit of taking on more work than you can realistically handle, both to earn praise or lighten the loved one's burden. God, I can't imagine, I can't even tell you how many family members try to remove things, obstacles, challenges, weights, barriers from the back and the shoulders of their loved ones for the loved one to feel relieved. Well, here's the thing. If you remove something from someone and take it on yourself, you can get away with it once in a while. But if you constantly do it, constantly remove the burdens, the barriers, the stress, the pain, or whatever it is from someone else onto your own shoulders, what do you think happens? It builds, it builds, it builds, it builds, and it breaks your back. Literally, physically, metaphorically, whatever you want to call. Psychologically, it breaks your back. It's too much of a burden to handle. And some of you in your job, especially for those high performers, high achievers, you'll just take on, and maybe you'll get it all done. But afterwards, you're feeling deflated, burned out, exhausted. And there's a catch-22. Society will pat you on the back and say, you're a hard worker. You're committed. You're resilient. And you're like, well, I don't know how much longer I can do this. But we adjust and we adapt. So the next one that I have, this one says a tendency to apologize or take blame in order to keep the peace. Wow. I've seen this with parents in addiction and loved ones in addiction. When I say parents, please think about spouses, grandparents, adopted parents, significant others, siblings. Let's just talk about support, right? Sometimes people say sorry for things that they're definitely not sorry for, just in order to keep the peace. I've seen parents confront their loved one or set boundaries, and the child just reacts in a very unhealthy way. And before you know it, the parent is apologizing to the child. Isn't that weird? You set boundaries for your own mental health and actually for their bettering. And when they react in a way that just is chaotic, you say, I'm sorry, to bring the peace down. I mean, just think about that cycle. But here's the thing. Long time ago, before you even had children, before you had your own family, when you were a part of your own family of origin, if you come from a dysfunctional home in which things were chaotic and you didn't want to ruffle the feathers and you didn't want to be a burden, you know what you did? You would just say sorry all the time. Things would happen in your life that weren't your fault, but you would think they're your fault. Can I give you an example? Children of divorce. Between 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, 13 years old, when two parents get divorced, the child almost always thinks that it's their fault. Now, I know that doesn't make any sense logically to the adults watching this. You're like, well, of course it's not the kid's fault. I mean, how could it be the kid's fault? However, when people divorce and separate, the child thinks it's the center of the universe. So anything that happens around the world of a child, the child thinks that they play a part in it. It's psychology. It's brain development. So therefore, that child starts to think that everything is their fault. And that's why sometimes people just randomly say sorry for things that aren't their fault. You might be one of those people. You might know one of those people. You say something that they're like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, hey, what are you sorry for? They're like, I don't know. I just say sorry all the time. Those are symptoms of codependency. The next one that we have is a pattern of avoiding conflict. Okay. So conflict is a scary thing, especially when you go through it in life and nobody is there to regulate you and calm you down and love you and support you and talk you through it. So what do? You're scared of conflict. Scared of conflict. And what do people do that are scared of conflict? They avoid it by all costs. How can you avoid conflict? There's a couple ways. One, you can never try anything, never do anything, never say anything. Just bleed into the fabric of life and just kind of be a wallflower. Or you can go to the flip side of it. High achiever, overachiever, perfectionist, do everything right so no one can ever come and confront you about it. Both of those, hyper avoidance and hyperactivity, perfectionism, are patterns of avoidance, patterns of conflict, right? And those are signs of codependency. I want to see what I'm going to pull up a comment here from our YouTube. Jess said, my grandmother who raised me went through many relationships as I was growing up. She would tell me it was my fault because I couldn't get along with them. And this is so sad. Jess, I want you to know, I'm going to put this comment up. That's really sad. First of all, I'm sorry you had to go through that, right? And I want you to know, whether it's many, many, many years later on in your life, hearing it from somebody that doesn't really know you that well, but appreciates the fact that you're a follower of this support group, it wasn't your fault, right? It isn't your fault. Grandma was going through grandma's experience. And oftentimes when things don't work out in people's lives, what do they want to do? They want to blame something else for reasons why their life isn't working out. And it's sad when that something else or someone else happens to be an innocent child, because guess what? Be careful for what you tell your children or grandchildren in this case, because it grows up to become their inner critic. Jess, I don't know you that well, but I have a feeling that there's a lot of times that you feel like you're not blank enough in life. Blank enough could be good enough, smart enough, healthy enough, happy enough, courageous enough, brave enough, whatever you want to call it, blank enough. And that doesn't come from who you are. It's this tape that got created in your mind because of grandma never did her own work on herself, right? She never did her own work on herself and hurt people. Your grandma's a hurt person. Hurt people, hurt people. Grandma was hurt. She hurt you. And you can actually take that, by the way, and start hurting others, or you can be brave and courageous to share something like that. Do your own work. Heal yourself, heal your codependency, heal your low self-esteem, all that kind of stuff. Because, I've seen a picture. Yeah, you got a child there with you in your picture. If you want to break that pattern, right? If you want to break multi-generational patterns of dysfunctional communication and trauma, the way you do it is by saying, I will take full responsibility for my life. Nothing that happens in my life is because of X, Y, and Z, is because of me. And if you could take that and stand on that space, and you can feel your power start to come in. So hopefully that helped. Let's see what Eileen said. I've been working on replacing the reaction of I'm sorry to I acknowledge your discomfort, your anger, your pain, your frustration. That's a beautiful way to do it, Eileen. And the power that is, it's not what you say, but how you say it. That sentence right there, I acknowledge your discomfort, your anger, your pain, your frustration, whatever it is, if said with compassion and said with authenticity, it's received really well. And I have a feeling that that's what you're doing with it. Sometimes people say that in a sarcastic way, just to kind of, it actually like breathes negative energy into the conversation. So it's not what you say, but how you say it. As long as you say that message with sincerity and authenticity, it's a beautiful replacement for the word sorry. So keep on keeping on with that one. Thank you for your interaction, by the way. So the next one that we have here is excessive concern about a loved one's habits or behaviors. Excessive concern. So is it codependent to be worried about someone else's behaviors? No. I mean, we're human beings. We're connected. If you're worried about someone making a bad decision, or you're worried about someone going through a hard time in their life, you just have some empathy and you have compassion. You're a good person. But if it's excessive means like pretty much 24/7, maybe when you're sleeping, but all the time. If it's excessive, if it's daily, if it's nightly, if it's starting to impact your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul, your health, right? You got to look into that, because there is something there beyond just the other person. There's something happening within you, inside of you, that's causing that. Let's see a couple here. Counselor Jim, conflict is a part of life. It's the coping skills we use. If you're taught bad coping skills, you will have difficulty with conflict. Absolutely. And here's the beauty of that, Jim. It's never too late to learn those coping skills. You're a perfect example. And I've seen a lot of people like that. So sometimes people say, well, I was dealt a bad hand of cards in life. I didn't have X, Y, Z, mom, dad, grandma, support group to teach me these things. Okay, well, that sucks. I wish you would have. But now that you didn't, what are you going to do about it? Because we can learn these skills throughout the course of life. We are never too old to learn how to cope if we've never learned how to cope. So the message of that one is never too late. Dorothy, I think I've already failed this quiz. Will there be a sliding scale? At least I can laugh at myself. You know what? If most parents that are watching this at some point, they could say they failed this, but most people with the addiction and recovery world. So even not the ones that are, I know you're not the identified patient, but the people that have substance abuse and don't have substance abuse, but are experiencing addictions in their life, they all pretty much fail this test, if they're being honest with it. But the beauty of it is once you identify these signs, what can you do about it? And there's something you can do about it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Glad you can laugh at yourself. Sometimes we need to. So this one is the habit of making decisions for others or trying to manage loved ones. So where does that come from, by the way? The habit of making decisions. If you are a child growing up and you had to become a parentified role, so that means a child that had to be an adult. Okay. So maybe you were the oldest sibling or just the old soul or the responsible one of the litter, of the bunch, and you had to become the decision maker because maybe mom and dad weren't present, maybe there was addiction, mental health, maybe there was argument, fighting, custody, and someone had to be the adult, and you had to make decisions for other people. You go on this lifelong pattern of making decisions for others, people, places, and things for the rest of your life because you create an identity of that's what I do. I used to have a hard time with that. When someone would bring a problem to me, I would give them a solution right away. I would try to fix the problem right away. And they're like, dude, I'm just trying to talk to you. Like, I don't need you to fix it. Just listen. I couldn't. I had to fix things, So habit of making decisions. By the way, when you make too many decisions for loved ones, you cripple their decision-making ability. For some of you family members that have tried so hard to do the right thing for your kid, but your kid just won't do it themselves, at some point you're making that decision-making muscle of theirs weaker and weaker and weaker, even though your intentions are so damn good. Okay. The next one is a mood that reflects how others feel rather than your own emotions. So I know there's this thing that goes around of people being empaths and they're being empaths and they're empaths. And what that means is this. It means that they feel the feelings around them. They feel the energy, the vibration, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that there is some truth to that. For some people that are highly sensitive people, there is some truth to that. However, if your mood always reflects the people around you, it's not always that you're an empath. It could be because you're highly codependent, because you can't identify your own emotions. You can't identify your own feelings. The feelings of others are your feelings, right? If someone walks in and they're tense, and all of a sudden you feel tense, it's not that you're an empath. It means that you're so codependent that you can't just be in your peace while someone else is feeling tension around you. Maybe that's the case. The next one here is guilt. Oh, this is huge. I talk about self-care all the time, so check this one out. It says guilt or anxiety when doing something for yourself. Look how deep-rooted codependency can get. That if you do something for yourself, like you say, you know what, I'm going to go get a massage. I'm going to go shop. I'm going to go take a drive down the beach. I'm going to go on a dinner and a movie by myself. That when you do that, you feel guilt and you feel shame. You feel anxiety for doing something like that. Huge sign of codependency. Huge. Because at some point you were believed that you can't focus on yourself because you have to focus on others. So your muscle of self-care is so weak that when you engage in it, you feel guilty for that. That's so sad because it's the opposite of that should happen. I was just doing this talk with our program partners. I do these kind of things with my staff. If a staff member tells me they need to take a day off to focus on themselves and take care of themselves, I say, good for you. Go handle it. Enjoy that. Get some rest. Focus. Do whatever you got to do. Invest in yourself. Plug yourself into the wall. Get some energy. That's the message that society needs to reinforce when someone's trying to take time for themselves. But those of you who come from dysfunctional families and have codependency, when you do that, you feel guilty. So Counselor Julian, what are you saying here? We cannot take responsibility away from others. That's enabling behavior as well as it becomes codependent behavior. Playing the hero. Oh man, does playing the hero, is that tiring? Like I said, there's nothing wrong with being a hero once in a while and stepping up, suiting up and showing up. But if it's a pattern that you've been doing for decades, it gets old after a while. It gets old after a while. And when I say old, it's not that there's no honor in it. It's actually cool to do that. but it gets old on the self. Like it's hard to be able to manage that. So the next one we have here, there's only a few more symptoms. I know some of you are just checking away as you're going. There's a few more. It says doing things you don't really want to do simply to make others happy. Okay, that's a sign of codependency. So there's this thing that we all know as called peer pressure. And like I said, I'm a high school basketball coach. I've been doing it for 14 seasons. In that age demographic, like 14 to 18, peer pressure is real. You can go to a social gathering, you can go to a party, and you might end up doing something, a behavior, taking a substance, doing something just because other people around you are doing it. So you do things you don't want to do just because you want to feel that embrace. This happens a lot of times in relationships. People put their physical body in situations that they otherwise wouldn't want to do because they just want to make others happy. And when you're an adolescent, it makes sense because we're not fully there yet. But when, as an adult, when you start doing this kind of stuff, you really got to look into say, why am I living a life doing things just for other people? Like I said, if that happens once in a while, it's cool. But if it's a pervasive pattern of behavior, you got to look into that. You got to look into that. And again, a lot of you family members that say, I do this because of my kid's addiction. I challenge you to look into your own life. I challenge you to look into your old patterns and see if any of this stuff existed before you even had a kid or relationship or anything. I'm not a betting man, but if I had to bet, I know some of these would exist. You can't just all of a sudden go from not being codependent to being codependent. It's impossible. Like if you're codependent, it's going to show up everywhere. That means it showed up before your kid's addiction also. Beta, I was almost all of that and didn't know that's part of codependency. Yeah, people don't know these things actually. Beta, you just think it's a part of like life and who I am. People think it's their identity. Like there's this caregiver identity that's known, and people go into certain professions for it. They go into nursing for it. They go into counseling for it. They go into therapy for it. If they don't do their own work, all they're doing is taking their childhood trauma of like feeling they have to help other people and doing it in a place that gives you a paycheck. But that's really not in a healthy way of operating, because it's like, how can you help other people when you haven't even addressed yourself, right? Taking your kids to Disneyland when you can't afford it. This is a good example. I mean, we could just remove the Disneyland with anything that's related to finances. If you're giving out money, parents do this all the time, and all of a sudden they're wondering, oh my God, I don't have money to do my stuff, but I wanted to make sure my kid was comfortable. At your own level of discomfort, can't pay the bills, you got to borrow money, you got to take loans out from coworkers and family members and all that kind of stuff. If that's what you're doing, it's not out of love, I'll tell you that. Because yeah, you could think you're doing it out of love, but guess what? Where's the love to yourself? Love is love. So you can't give it out somewhere else and not give it to yourself, you know? So you got to see, why am I doing that? What's the reason behind it? Jess said, I have a really hard time saying no to people. I know that's going to be coming up here pretty soon in some of the roots of codependency. You're not the only one. Jess, if I ask the members of this live stream community to share how many of them have a hard time or had a hard time saying no to people, majority of the hands would go up and they would identify with you. So trust me when I say this, in this room, you're not alone. And in most rooms, you're not alone. It's something that unfortunately we're programmed to feel bad for. And the last one, the overwhelming fears of rejection and abandonment, right? So if I don't do X, Y, and Z, am I going to be rejected? Am I not going to be loved? Am I going to be left? And when I say overwhelming, so everybody has those fears, right? Like the fear of rejection is, they ask 8 billion people, do you have a fear of rejection? 8 billion people are going to say yes. I mean, who's going to say no? Not at all. Maybe some of those like really, what do they call those? Like apathetic or like crazy salespeople that they don't care about rejection. But even those people in their personal life, when it gets to like emotions and relationships, terrified of rejection, right? They just don't care about it in the sales context. But overwhelming fear of rejection means like it consumes you. It consumes your entire thing. And it goes back into abandonment for sure. So those were the symptoms. And what did Dorothy say here? She said, wow, I do have some work to do on myself. We all do. We're a work in progress. I always say I'm a human being in recovery, right? Recovering human being. Because here's the thing, when you do the work, Dorothy, more will reveal itself because we're constantly evolving and constantly changing. So the goal is to, address the roots of your codependency and then see what opens up from there. And we just keep expanding and evolving. So it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that you have work to do on yourself, because a lot of family members come here and say, hey, my kid had the work to do, but not me. I mean, they're the one with the addiction, not me. And not knowing that oftentimes the family is just sick as their loved one, or just in need of support and love as their loved one. So if you identified with a lot of those symptoms of codependency, let's look at some of the causes. So I'll go over maybe 5 of them because I want to talk about some of the benefits of treatment and support for codependency. So number 1, which is there for any type of addictions, trauma, codependency in this case, is, was there any type of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse growing up? Okay. Physical abuse, we all know what that is. Sexual abuse, we all know what that is. Emotional abuse is sometimes not as known or identified. It could come in the form of neglect. So sometimes people don't understand that you could come from a very successful family. I'm talking about like upper, higher socioeconomic status. But the primary caregiver, whether that's the mom or the dad, doesn't matter about that dynamic, is so busy traveling and making money and going on the road and all that kind of stuff that emotionally they're not present. Physically, they're not present, but emotionally, they're not present. And that leaves a kid feeling abandoned. I promise you, there's no difference. I know you're not going to believe this one, but I'm talking about in the internal world and the mind of a human to a child. When a parent just gets up and leaves and abandons, it makes the kid feel a certain way. When a mom or dad is constantly traveling all the time, it makes the kid feel almost the same way. The only difference is the successful ones can provide and the other ones probably can't, but the kid feels the lack of emotional connection. So physical, emotional, sexual abuse, all that kind of stuff is up there with majority of mental health issues. Now, the second one is the parents or caregivers that ignore a child's need in favor of their own. So, going back real quick to the emotional types of abuse. So a lot of times, just because a family raises their kid a certain way or a culture raises a kid a certain way, they don't know that what they're doing could potentially be emotionally abusive, right? There's a lot of cultures that say kids are supposed to be seen and not heard. Or kids that do something wrong, you put them in timeout till they figure it out. You know, these kind of things are not the smartest parenting techniques, because who says that what the generation before taught us about parenting was right if they say kids should be seen and not heard? I mean, what does that even mean? A child's not supposed to talk about their feelings and emotions. They're just supposed to show up. I mean, that's such a power trip. You know, it's such a power trip. And the other stuff with like put a kid in timeout. Well, if a kid's scared and terrified and doesn't have the words to articulate what they're going through, putting them in timeout makes them feel like they're not allowed to show emotions. Well, what does that do? It teaches them how to suppress their emotions, which bottles up and turns into a cluster F of things. So parents and caregivers that ignore a child's needs in favor of their own, you know, you always look at those portraits. Maybe you have, on your Facebook page, you got family members, loved ones that have children, and they have like those initial pictures of the sonogram, the baby in the stomach, and they're doing all this cute stuff, and they're doing these countdowns, and they're doing like all this different, the showers, and they do the balloons and pop it red and blue for what color, what gender the kid is, and then the kid's born, and they have all these pictures of holding the child in their arm and saying, this is the most precious thing in my life and the most important thing in my life, and they talk about it and all that kind of stuff. And 60% of marriages end up in divorces. So you look at it this way, that 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 7 years down the line, 9 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line, the parents, they start to put their own thoughts, their own needs, their own desires ahead of the child, which is what happens. And you might think that never happens, but guess what? It happens all the time. And I'm not judging nobody for that. Trust me, I'm not judging anyone for that. But when a parent constantly puts their own needs in front of the child, it's going to cause some type of serious codependency later on in life. That kid's going to be searching and searching and searching for validation, for love, for support. The next one, this is you might not know about because it's a psychological personality disorder, but if anybody comes from a narcissistic family, you know, a parent, caregiver that's narcissistic or has borderline personality disorder, or any type of serious mental illness, you know, psychotic symptoms and stuff like that, and you might have to suppress your self-identity to accommodate to them, because those things are very loud and very present and all-consuming. And there's no room for a child to be themselves, express themselves when that is present. You know, and I'll tell you this, you know, a lot of parents might think, hey, they might have the narcissistic personality disorder and this and that, and or your kids might think you do. If you've been watching these talks on a regular and you've been acknowledging things like, hey, I have so much work to do, or I realize I have this, or if you have insight and awareness, I'll tell you this, you're not struggling with narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder would come watch this thing one time, maybe twice, say, I'm full of shit. I don't know what I'm talking about. This is all BS. They don't need this. It's a waste of their time, and they just get up and they go. They won't even look at themselves. So imagine being raised by a person that lives that way. It's their way or the highway. They are right all the time. Nobody else could have an opinion. They lack empathy. It's tough. It's really, really tough. So the next one is controlling or overprotective caregivers who prevent a child from learning safe limits and setting healthy boundaries. Hey, I told this to you guys many times. If you control something, it's going to go out of control. The more you control it, the more it goes out of control. The more you protect it, the more it's going to blow up. We have to allow people to experience the natural consequences of their actions. I don't care. And I know you do it with good intentions. Well, parents control something because they don't want their loved one to get hurt. Especially if they were hurt before and they don't want the kid to experience what they experienced. They overcompensate by controlling. But your kid is not you. You know, it's a different human being. It's a different life form, different entity. Allow it to be itself. But if you come from a controlling family, codependency is something that's seriously going to have roots into your psyche. The next one is one or both parents leaving the family, making you afraid of future abandonment. You know, this is fear of abandonment's real. It's really, really real. And what that does is it leaves the person doing anything they can, grasping and reaching to be loved and not wanting to make mistakes. And, you know, that's the whole sorry stuff. And let me see, Martha said something here that's really important. I know Martha. She said it's really hard to allow someone to hit rock bottom. It's really hard. Of course it's really hard. I mean, it's who wants to watch somebody else go through some type of pain? But pain is what makes us stronger. I mean, pain is literally what makes us stronger. Pain is what allows us to grow and evolve. So not letting someone hit rock bottom, I believe that's even harder. It might not be harder in the micro level, in like the right here in front of you level, but on the lifeline, on the timeline of life, when you go macro and zoom out, like it's a lot harder to not let someone hit bottom. A lot harder, you know, and always remember, we can always raise the bottom. So it's not like they have to go down so far. We can raise it with boundaries and raise the bottom to not allow them to go so low. We have some power in that. And I think my mom said it on this talk before too. She learned this somewhere, that the family needs to hit bottom too. I think in order for the family to raise the bottom and set boundaries, they need to hit bottom themselves. Like they need to get to a place that they just can't do it anymore. If you get there, you have a better chance of allowing someone else to get there also. But if you don't get there, they're not going to get there. As clinicians, I train people and tell people, you can never take your client further than you're willing to go yourself or have gone yourself. You know? Let's see what Cheryl said. What's up, Cheryl? Thank you for being back. Or in our family, not my mom's own needs came first, but her responsibility to take care of my father. She's verbalized that he came first. She became visibly nervous if she couldn't do that. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And by the way, I don't know about your situation, but if that's what was familiar to you, if that's what you saw and was modeled for you, there is a high probability that you also will do some of those same patterns. It not necessarily mean the spouse, but it could be just putting something else, work, a person, a situation above your own needs, and you become anxious and nervous when you put yourself first. And I could be wrong on that. If I am, I'm sorry, but that's just good insight to provide for for someone else out there that might benefit from that. This one causes anxious attachment. So if you don't know what anxious attachment is, Google it, look it up. It's pretty cool. But where it comes from is caregivers alternating between loving and present and distant and unavailable. So it's kind of like hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold. Like, for example, if someone's walking through the door, the parent or caregiver, you don't know what version of them is coming through. That causes anxiety. It freaks out a child. So it creates this thing called anxious attachment. And anxious attachment just says, okay, I need to be my best, good little boy, good little girl in order to reduce the amounts of times that it's bad when you don't even know it has nothing to do with you. It's their own world, their own reality that's happening. So anxious attachment is one of the things. And when you look back into your own childhood, if you had anxious attachment, so if you only had one caregiver, you're very anxious about it, because if you lose that caregiver, you're terrified. Or if you had two parents that were hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold, it leaves you feeling seriously anxious. And codependency is a form of coping skill to deal with that. The last one, criticism and bullying from parents, siblings, or peers that leave you lingering insecurity in relationships. So criticism and bullying. So when you criticize your kid, when you tell them they're not good enough, what they did wasn't good enough, you got to look into that and say, why am I even doing that? I have a feeling that someone did that to you, and you're just doing to others what was done to you. Because if you look at a child, as long as they do their best, it doesn't matter if you think it's good enough or not. It's none of your business, actually. If they did their best, and you know they did their best, and they tell you they did their best, just say, good job, I'm proud of you. Right? What's the point of telling a child that what they're doing is not good enough? Well, what is the point of that? It's a serious power and ego thing, and it's something that's familiar to you. And bullying can also come from siblings. Some of you have multiple children, and the kids were just kids are being kids, whatever they say, the older sibling, just tough on the young ones. That can mess some people up too. It can mess some people up. And Cheryl said I wasn't wrong there. So yeah, thank you for being gracious enough for me to take an educated guess on that. But I've done this enough to kind of put some things together. Jim said codependency for the addict, can't function without my substances, peers, drama to feel accepted in their world. Yeah. So Jim kind of opened it up for you guys to see, because, he works with individuals who have addictions very closely. And for them, so not for the family member, but for them, they become highly codependent to the substance, which is their coping skill. They become highly codependent to something that helps them to cope. Because if it's not the substance, it can also be a behavior. Addictive behaviors can be in that same thing Jim's talking about there. Peers, social groups, and drama. Oh my God. So if you come from a family dynamic that was really chaotic, the brain can become addicted to chaos. So when you get into the sober world, you're going to start to seek chaos. And if you can't find it, you're going to self-destruct and create it. People create chaos in their lives just to feel normal. I mean, how about that? Sad. I agree. He was right. I see it in my family. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad. It always feels good to be told you're right. Once in a while that happens. So last but not least, if you're watching this and you identified with all those, like Dorothy said she did, and some of the other people came in here and said they did, what do you have to do? Right? What's there to do? Number one, you have to recognize the key signs of codependency for you. So I went over 12 of them today. You identify which ones they are, right? And kind of explore the roots of those things. When did they start? It started long before addiction was a part of your life, And then you have to overcome. So this one directly goes to the comment here for Miss Jess when she said, I have a hard time saying no to people. Jess, this is for you. You have to overcome your people-pleasing tendencies. Now, this is like a prescription, right? And what do people do with prescriptions? They either take it or they don't. But if you don't, your life of continuing to not be able to say no will look like the days, weeks, months, years of your past. And that's your choice. If you don't mind it, continue to say yes to everything. But if you say enough is enough, I'm tired of saying no to people at my own cost, then you have to overcome your people-pleasing tendencies. How do you overcome it? By saying no. You're going to be so uncomfortable. Oh my God. The first few times you say no, you're going to be full of like shame almost. you're going to feel like a bad person. But I just gave you a prescription to do it. And I strongly suggest you take it. Because if you don't, the past continues to create your future, unfortunately. And then it's addressing related mental health symptoms, including feelings of guilt, anxiety, and depression. So if you are a family member watching this and you identified with all these symptoms of codependency, now what you have to do is you have to look at all of the underlying stuff, which is guilt, right? Feelings of guilt. When did that start? Long, long time ago. Some of you left your home and left your families and all that kind of stuff, and you've been feeling guilty since then, especially those who've immigrated, And then there's anxiety and there's depression. You got to look at all those things. You got to deal with them with a professional. And then you got to reconnect with your sense of self. And some of you might have never had a sense of self or established a sense of self. So it's a blank canvas. Find out who you are, find out your values, find out your compass, your true north, and then just go. Connect with yourself. Connect with yourself. Today's the day. This is the time. This 2022 is ending in 3 months. Why not? And let's see, I have a couple comments here. And the very last one, by the way, setting healthy boundaries. So I don't think you can just start setting healthy boundaries without going through that checklist first. People try to set boundaries as me and Jim always say, hey, if you're going to set a boundary, make sure you can hold it. Most people set boundaries they can't hold, unfortunately. And if you do the work that was identified above, you'll be able to set boundaries, because overcoming people-pleasing tendencies, if you can't do that, you can't set boundaries. Straight up. It is impossible to do so. So we have a few comments here with Eileen. She said, surrounding yourself with supportive people helps to balance out the voices of family or other telling you that you are selfish. Yeah, we are a product of a community. Everything's a family. So dysfunctional families, sometimes we come from them. If we find a healthy family later on, might not be our family of origin, but a family of choice that we can surround ourselves with. It normalizes some thoughts that we always should have had, but we never knew we could. It allows us to kind of be experiencing life in a healthy manner when no one ever gave us the blueprint or the template to do so. Julian said, peace of mind and serenity can seem like boredom to those of us who grew up in chaos, so we become dependent on that feeling. So Julian's referring to the chaos theory of people blowing things up because they just need to get back to a sense of normalcy. And there's a lot of times that people say they're experiencing calmness, serenity, and recovery and sobriety, and it freaks them out. It really does, because they're like, dude, something's about to happen. It's the calm before the storm. What if there is no storm? What if it's just like calm and sobriety? They can't believe it because their life, their experiences never matched that. Jess, that is short but true. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Serapis, Param in a polo. P.S. Good talk. Thank you for the good talk compliment. The polo, I only wear the same black T-shirts, and when you only have a few black T-shirts and it's laundry day, you're stuck with your polo. So that's really what happened there. There was no rhyme or reason behind it. Once I do my laundry, I'll have my black T-shirt back. And Cheryl, this is very helpful with capital VERY, so I believe that it was very helpful, and you're welcome as always. Counselor Jim, boredom, the onset of peace and serenity. Just not there yet. Yep, I know. Boredom's a beautiful space, man. It's a really good place to be, because it does lead to peace and serenity, which we're ultimately looking for. Cataline, my mom never stopped saying how gracious she was to let me immigrate, which I never even asked, but she made me feel guilty. See, there you go. And she, by the way, I know a little bit about her story. She immigrated at a much, she left her hometown to go to college and all that kind of stuff, and then take that education, double it down into foreign land. And sometimes people don't know any better. There's one of the worst things families do. Even Persians do it, believe it or not. They just say, do you have any idea how much I sacrificed for you? Thank God my mom and dad never did that. I would just lose my mind if they did. But there's parents that say, I gave up my whole life for you. I sacrificed everything for you. Like, what do you think that does to a child? Talk about instilling ultimate guilt into the mind of an innocent human. But I can understand where you're coming from with that, Kathleen. And Jess, most definitely helpful. So all that being said, it's 10:50. And this was a wonderful talk on codependency And share it with anyone you think might benefit from it. I love and appreciate all of you, and I will be back. And Jaime John, you're welcome. See, there's another of the Iranians who said thankful for that comment. I think my mom and dad said something for it too, but it's happening. It's real. Go check it out on the news, share it with people, keep the awareness up there. It's the best we can do. And we'll go from there. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Enjoy your weekend. I'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.